Hello, my name is Tasmin Alexander, and I'm a final year PhD student at the University of Glasgow, working in collaboration with researchers at Ifakara Health Institute. Today, I will present our research into why culling of free roaming dogs persists, drawing on Tanzania as a case study, but with broader relevance to other countries where culling occurs. So a quick thank you to my supervisors, collaborators, and the participants in Tanzania, without whom this research wouldn't be possible. And I want to provide a content warning because the following slides contain content that some may find disturbing. So, dogs are thought to be the earliest domesticated animal, and our relationship with them spans over 15,000 years, which reflects the deep and enduring bond between humans and dogs. Of the over 700 million dogs on Earth today, approximately 80% are free roaming. However, most of these free roaming dogs are owned or cared for in some capacity, and the population size, composition, and movement are shaped by the communities they live alongside. People depend on dogs to guard livestock, protect homes, and provide companionship, just to name a few things. But these same dogs can also cause genuine harm through bites, livestock attacks, and rabies, a disease that kills an estimated 59,000 people every year, a disease of which dogs themselves are also victims, though the full scale of the loss has not been quantified. Governments globally manage free roaming dog populations through strategies such as vaccination, sterilisation, sheltering, owner education, but also many cull. Culling, as defined by ICAM, is the killing of animals for reasons other than individual welfare state. And culling of free roaming dogs is currently taking place or has historically taken place across Europe, Asia, the Americas, Oceania, and Africa. In this study, we are focusing on culling organised and implemented by state-employed animal health officers. And dog population management and rabies control are often the stated aims. But culling is ineffective for both. Populations rebound, and culling does not sustainably reduce rabies incidence. For rabies, culling is also counterproductive. Vaccinated dogs are killed, it drives owners to hide their dogs during vaccination campaigns or move them to new areas, spreading rabies further. Yet culling persists. And despite its continued use, there's very little research into how and why it actually happens in practice. And that is what my PhD set out to understand. To try and answer this question, we turn to Tanzania. Tanzania has a dog population of over 2 million, approximately 78% of which are free roaming and owned. Tanzania has strong animal welfare legislation that recognizes animals as sentient beings and restricts how and when animals can be killed, including provisions for humane treatment. It's also made significant commitments to evidence-based rabies control. It was one of the first countries in East Africa to have a national rabies elimination strategy endorsed by the World Organization of Animal Health, formally committing to mass dog vaccination as a primary approach. But culling still persists. So, how did we investigate why? We used a mixed methods approach, working with the government animal health officers across Tanzania over 2 years. In 2022, we surveyed over a quarter of Tanzania's 184 districts to understand the rabies and dog population management control strategies being used, with a follow-up survey in districts where culling was reported. In late 2023, we carried out 11 in-depth interviews with senior district level officers who make district level decisions about funding and resource allocation, and also field-based officers who implement rabies and dog population management strategies on the ground. Before getting into the why, let me briefly share what we found about how culling actually operates in Tanzania. Culling was reported in almost half of the districts we surveyed. Officers described it as organised by animal health departments with involvement from other departments, local leaders, and some community members. Culling was not always announced in advance, and while some community members assisted, others resisted. Officers described dogs being selected based on their presence in an area rather than health status. Also, following vaccination campaigns, rabies outbreaks, nuisance reports, or as part of routine exercises. Both owned and vaccinated dogs were reported to have been culled. Methods described were shooting and poisoning. Shooting was sometimes haphazard, with some dogs injured but not killed. Substances used for poisoning were not always known and were described as obtained through informal channels. So that is what culling looks like in practice. But to understand why it happened, we need to understand the context officers are operating in. Participants described there being too many free-roaming dogs, and these dogs causing real harms. One senior officer said, "Dogs have eaten pigs, dogs have eaten livestock, dogs have injured goats, dogs have injured cattle, dogs have injured people. Unfortunately, there are signs somewhere that 4 or 5 people have died because of that. So that anger is what motivates people to say that they don't want to see dogs roaming. And these are the problems officers are being tasked to solve." There was pressure to respond to these harms. Pressure came from multiple directions simultaneously. Community complaints escalating through local leaders, politicians raising them in council meetings, and directives from other government departments and orders from higher authorities. And this pressure carried real consequences. Officers described fear of reprimand and job insecurity if they failed to respond. Captured by this quote from an officer: "It increases every day, and there are too many complaints, and especially from the higher levels. They are pressuring you to do the exercise. If you don't do it, we will deal with you. Now you have to do it. There's no way." There was a consistent theme across districts about the limitations within the animal health sector and the limited resources available to tackle the free roaming dog populations. In some districts, there were no vets at all when officers arrived. Officers also discussed limited resources for sustainable vaccination of dogs. Neutering and sterilisation were also discussed, but crucially, always as something officers wanted to do but couldn't resource themselves. Officers described budgets for vaccination being cut before they even arrived. As one officer put it, "Issues on dogs and cows will be deleted." And when they asked higher authorities for alternatives, they were told none existed, with one officer stating, "We told the higher authorities that this law prohibits the use of poison. Can we use alternative methods? They told us they don't have alternatives, so we continue with our method." They also felt they had limited international support on the issue. Without clear guidance, officials turned to the legislation, but interpreted it differently. Some used it to justify culling. As one officer put it, "We go back to the animal law, which says that if an animal can cause more harm than good, it needs to be culled. When we see dogs in a group already causing harm to people, we go to kill them." Others pointed to animal welfare legislation as a reason not to cull. Some drew on local confinement rules, using culling as both an enforcement mechanism and a deterrent to get communities to keep their dogs inside during the day. The same legislation, interpreted differently, provided opposite decisions. Additionally, no officer described any consequences for culling except when humans were injured. Beyond policy and pressure, officers also drew on their own personal beliefs about when making decisions about culling. Some felt a genuine moral opposition based on the issue of animal welfare. Others felt a duty to protect their communities from the harms caused by free-roaming dogs. They felt their priority was the safety of human life. Officers were not naive about culling. Respondents acknowledged it did not work in the long term to tackle dog populations or their harms. But culling was viewed as visible and immediate. It allowed the officers to be viewed as taking action and caused pressure to temporarily reduce, as described by this junior animal health officer. "If there are no complaints, I don't do it. I relax. If they have complained that there are too many dogs, you go and cull some of them to reduce them. If they decrease, you relax. Culling had become a standard procedure in many districts through individual officers' experience, but also predating their time in the role. Some described culling as having a long history, referencing back to the colonial period. Additionally, culling wasn't just standard procedure institutionally, but some officers stated if they did not organise culling, some communities would take on the responsibility themselves. However, every time culling happens, it generates harm. Officers described animal suffering from inhumane methods and non-target species deaths, such as livestock accidentally being shot or wildlife killed by poison. Officers themselves experienced moral distress and described receiving complaints and emotional responses from community members whose dogs had been killed, and in some cases received physical and spiritual threats. Community members have been directly injured or had their property damaged during culling events. They also found culling to undermine rabies control. Community trust in governments eroded, and owners started hiding their dogs during vaccination campaigns, and vaccinated dogs were also killed, as captured by this officer who stated, "A few days ago, we killed a certain dog, and after killing it, we were told that the dog had been vaccinated recently, and we killed it." So before I conclude, let me draw these pieces together. So there's a real problem. Too many free-roaming dogs causing genuine harm. This generates pressure on animal health officers to act, but alternatives are not available or resourced. Legislation is ambiguous and not enforced. And officers hold their own individual beliefs about culling. Culling has a history. It is what has always been done, and in some cases, what is expected. Within this environment, individual discretion is permitted, and when there is room for discretion and culling offers a visible rapid response that temporarily reduces pressure, some officers take it. Officers are aware of the harm culling causes to animals, officers, communities, and rabies control. But in many districts, these harms do not outweigh the immediate pressure they face, and that's why culling persists. So culling persists not because it is an effective or sustainable solution, but because these conditions make it the easier and for some the only available option. And this is not unique to Tanzania. These conditions are likely familiar in many settings where culling occurs. Change requires addressing these conditions. Resourcing sustainable, humane alternatives requires significant investment in the animal health sector. Conversations could also begin about distributing responsibility for free-roaming dog population management across sectors, reducing the burden on the animal health officers alone. Clearer guidance and direction from higher authorities and enforcement of existing legislation are also needed. Until these conditions change, culling will continue. And I will leave you with a quote from one of our officers, because it captures the history of this practice and what happens if nothing changes. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.